Back to the Future is my absolute favorite movie of all time. It's got action, sci-fi, romance, comedy, great characters, a great story. It's just all around a great, great movie. So, as you could guess, the second movie is not far behind. Back to the Future Part 2 has been getting some people talking lately, since the date that Marty visited in the future, October 21st, 2015, is right around the corner. People have started talking about what the movie got right and what it got not so right.
Shark still looks fake.
The one thing that everybody seems to want is not flying cars, not self-lacing Nikes, not Mr. Fusion, but the hoverboard. People never stop talking about this hovering skateboard that will be in every kid's hand by the time 2015 rolls around. Or will it? I'm sad to say that what we're waiting for might only be a part of an alternate reality and won't be arriving in ours for several years. Today, we're going to talk about how the hoverboard might actually not be a real thing until early to mid 2020s, instead of 2015 as we were once led to believe.
Hey, McFly, you bojo! Front bars don't work on water! Unless you've got power!
Before we start trying to wrap our heads around the oh-so-complicated subject of time travel, we need to establish how time travel in the Back to the Future universe works. Let's leave Back to the Future for a second and check out another series of movies, Harry Potter. As many people know, the third movie in the series widened the boundaries of what magic could do in their world and introduced us to the Time Turner, a locket that can transport you to any given point in time. It's by this point people started calling bullshit. That the rest of the franchise doesn't matter since they could just go back and undo every mistake they do. Or hell, they could even go back in time to kill Voldemort as an infant. But that would not have been possible. Have you ever noticed how the time traveling prisoner of Azkaban works? Take this for example. When Harry and the gang are having a cup of tea with Hagrid in his cabin, all of a sudden an urn explodes, and Harry gets hit in the head with some sort of rock, which leads him to noticing Fudge coming down the hill. Now, let's fast forward to later in the movie, where Harry and Hermione go back in time using the Time Turner. They end up at the cabin, looking at past Harry, Ron, Hermione, and Hagrid in the cabin. They notice Fudge coming down the hill, and they see that the people in the cabin don't see them. Hermione then picks up a rock and throws it at the urn. Then she throws another rock that ends up hitting Harry in the head, which leads to him noticing Fudge. Again. So what that means is that what made Harry notice Fudge from the beginning was a future Hermione hitting him in the head with a rock, which he would also witness present Hermione do in the future, but from a different perspective. Did you understand all that? I hope so, because it will become even more confusing from now on. So what that means is that the timeline of Harry Potter is already set. It's built up on one timeline that plays out in the exact same way every time. Harry getting hit in the head, and goes back in time where Hermione hits past Harry in the head. Past Harry will later move on to going back in time where past Hermione will hit past Harry in the head. And it will go on like that in an endless loop. So, why does that mean that Voldemort can't get killed in the past? Simple. He's alive in the present. No matter how many times they try, no matter how many people try to kill Voldemort as a child, no one will ever succeed, since according to the timeline, Voldemort grows up to kill Harry's parents and yada yada yada. If someone went back in time and successfully killed Voldemort, it would create an alternate timeline. Then it could not repeat in an endless loop, because when you've done it once, Voldemort would be dead, and they couldn't go back in time to kill him again. In the end, that, according to the rules set up by the third movie, would be impossible. So, sorry how it should have ended. I'm afraid your theory wouldn't work. Now, let's get back to the Future. If you're as obsessed with Back to the Future as I am, you might have already told me, or your screen rather, that at the end of the first Back to the Future, when Marty arrives back in 1985, he runs to the mall where Doc died to see him die again and see his past self go back in time to relive the same thing that happened to him earlier in the movie, making it an endless loop. But the answer to why the time traveling in Back to the Future works differently from the one of Harry Potter is staring you right in the face. Lone Pine Mall. You might not understand, so let me explain. At the beginning of the movie, Doc reveals the time machine to Marty on the parking lot of Twin Pines Mall. Not Lone Pine Mall, Twin Pines Mall. The reason for the name change is quite subtly explained to us in the movie. Check this out. Doc tells Marty that when he was younger, the whole area where the mall is was farmland as far as the eye could see. All of it owned by Old Man Peabody, who had a strange fascination with growing pine trees, which led them to naming the mall Twin Pines Mall. Now, when Marty goes back in time, he ends up in a field. Since the DeLorean only moves you through time and not through space, this is a spot that later would be the parking lot of Twin Pines Mall. Now when Marty speeds away, he accidentally runs over one of two pines in front of the house, the Twin Pines, making it a lone pine. And who owns the land? Nice. So now, when Marty finally gets back to 1985, the mall is called Lone Pine Mall because of what he did in 1955. This proves that every time someone goes back in time, it alters the timeline. Heck, that's even what the movie is about. If the Back to the Future universe worked the same way as the Prisoner of Azkaban universe, no matter what happened and no matter how hard he tried, Marty would not be able to erase his own existence, because his parents would still get together and have him in the future. So, technically, the Marty we see speeding away from the parking lot at the end of the movie has lived his whole life in a reality where his parents are rich and in love, where Biff is a wimp, and where the mall is called Lone Pine Mall. Also, when that Marty goes back in time, he should arrive at the exact same moment and place that the Marty we follow shows up. So now there should be two Martys in 1955. Lone Pine Marty and Twin Pine Marty. That creates a whole bunch of other paradoxes that would have altered what Twin Pine Marty goes through, but let's not talk about that. So what does this have to do with when the hoverboard is invented? Well, in the real world, skateboards didn't become popular until early to mid-60s. But when Marty goes back in time and introduces the citizens of Hill Valley to this new cool thing that hasn't been invented yet, it was 1955. So you can assume that since skateboarding technology had not become that advanced yet, and wouldn't become until about 10 years later, that Marty sped up the development of the hoverboard by 10 years. So when Marty goes back to 1985, we can assume that skateboard technology is 10 years more advanced than it was when he left. In the second movie, he then goes forward in time in that same timeline to 2015, where hoverboards exist. If Marty hadn't gone back in time and helped speed up the development of the skateboard by 10 years, when he arrived in 2015, hoverboards probably wouldn't have existed because hoverboard technology would be 10 years behind of what it is in the movie. Now, you might be thinking, how do we know that the 2015 that we will see in a year is not the alternate future that Marty created when he went back in time? Easy. Skateboards were invented in the mid-1960s in our reality, not mid-1950s. Look at this. In our reality, skateboards were invented in the 1960s. In Marty's reality in Back to the Future Part 2, they were invented in the 1950s because he sped up the process. Now, let's check out the future. In Marty's reality in Back to the Future Part 2, hoverboards are invented sometime before 2015. But if we check out our timeline, hoverboards shouldn't be invented before sometime before 2025. So, since the development of skateboards and hoverboards aren't 10 years ahead like they are in the movie, we probably won't see as advanced hoverboards as the ones they have in the movie for another 10 years. Now, flying cars on the other hand, that you don't have an excuse for. Thank you everyone for watching. Since this is my first video, I thought I should explain to you what kind of videos I'll be doing on my channel. Basically what I'm going to be doing is videos where I talk about stuff, mostly related to movies and video games. That includes the kind of video you just saw where I talk about a specific thing, but I will also do stuff like reviews and top 10s of different stuff. So if you have any suggestions on what you want me to talk about, leave it in the comment section. And I hope to see you back here next time. Take care.